Allah exists. And honestly, sometimes people get so obsessed with proving everything through science that they completely forget the deeper reality of life, because science can explain how certain things happen, but it still struggles to explain why existence itself even exists. And sometimes people become so arrogant with human knowledge, they start acting like if science cannot fully explain something, then it cannot be real. And honestly, that mindset is dangerous, because human beings still understand only a tiny fraction of this universe, and yet people speak with absolute certainty about mysteries greater than themselves. And honestly, there are moments where people get frustrated and say, man, forget all. This prideful attitude toward knowledge, fuck science, if it makes people arrogant enough to think human beings know everything, because real wisdom begins when people become humble enough to admit there are realities beyond human understanding. And honestly, the deeper people study life, the more astonishing creation becomes, because look around for 1 second, look at the precision of the universe, look at the balance of nature, look at the balance of nature, look at the balance of nature, look at the bad, look at morality, and honestly tell me how people see all this complexity. Look at love, look at morality, and honestly tell me how people see all this complexity and still believe everything happened randomly, because common sense itself tells you design points toward a designer. If you walk into a room and see paint exploded accidentally and created art, if you see a luxury car, somebody exploded accidentally and created art. If you see a luxury car, somebody designed it. If you see a skyscraper, somebody engineered it. And yet somehow people look at the human eye, the human brain, the stars. That requires more faith than belief in Allah and the laws of physics, and say all this happened without intelligence. And honestly, that requires more faith than belief in Allah, because randomness does not naturally create order on this level. And honestly, modern society became obsessed with material explanations, because Apu became uncomfortable with spirituality, uncomfortable with humility, uncomfortable admitting there might be a higher power greater than human understanding. And honestly, arrogance blinds people, because the more pride enters a person, the harder it becomes for them to recognize truth. And honestly, one thing I notice is that people often confuse scientific discovery with human superiority, but science itself constantly changes theories, change discoveries, evolve, ideas get replaced. And honestly, that should humble people, not inflate their ego, because human knowledge remains limited and temporary, while creation itself continues revealing mysteries nobody fully understands. And honestly, one of the biggest questions science still struggles with is the beginning of existence, because no matter how advanced technology becomes, nobody can fully explain why there is something instead of nothing, because before planets, before stars, before matter, before time, before energy, what existed? And honestly, question alone pushes many people toward belief, because nothing cannot create everything without cause. And honestly, many scientists themselves admit the universe appears incredibly fine-tuned for life, because if gravity changed slightly, life would collapse. If oxygen levels change slightly, life would collapse. If Earth moves slightly farther or closer to the sun, life would collapse. And honestly, the precision becomes almost impossible to ignore, because everything functions with extraordinary balance. And honestly, balance itself points toward intelligence, because chaos rarely creates harmony at this level. And honestly, another thing that deeply fascinates me is the human body, because people wake up every day carrying miracles inside themselves without appreciating them. The heart beating automatically, blood flowing perfectly, wounds healing naturally, the brain processing unimaginable amounts of information every second. And honestly, science can describe these processes, but describing something is not the same as explaining ultimate purpose, because people can explain how a piano works mechanically, but that does not explain who created the music. And honestly, modern culture made many people spiritually numb, because society constantly feeds distractions, entertainment, social media, comparison, money, status, validation, everybody chasing temporary things while ignoring eternal questions. And honestly, after years of chasing distractions, many people still feel empty, because temporary pleasures cannot permanently satisfy the soul. And honestly, that emptiness is why conversations about Allah, faith, spirituality, and purpose continue growing, because deep down human beings crave meaning. People crave something greater than endless consumption and competition. And honestly, one thing that deeply impacts many people when they sincerely study Islam is how strongly Islam encourages reflection, because Islam constantly asks people to observe creation, observe nature, observe life, observe themselves. And honestly, the signs exist everywhere. The sky itself is a sign. The oceans are signs. The mountains are signs. Human consciousness is a sign, because existence itself is extraordinary. And honestly, many people became so used to miracles, they stopped recognizing them, because when miracles surround people every single day, they begin treating them as ordinary. And honestly, another thing that deeply moves me is morality, because if life were completely random, where does morality come from? Why do human beings naturally recognize justice, compassion, kindness, honesty, and evil? Because deep down, most people instinctively know some things are wrong: cruelty, oppression, betrayal, murder. And honestly, if morality were only human invention, then morality would constantly collapse into personal opinion. Yet across cultures, across history, human beings continue recognizing certain moral truths. And honestly, many people deny Allah while still believing life has objective meaning, objective justice, and objective human value. But those ideas become difficult to explain in a purely random, purposeless universe. And honestly, another thing modern society struggles with is emotional emptiness, because despite technological advancement, despite wealth, despite endless entertainment, anxiety, depression, loneliness, addiction, and hopelessness continue increasing. And eventually many people begin realizing material success alone cannot heal spiritual hunger, because the soul needs nourishment too. And honestly, one reason faith becomes powerful is because faith gives people purpose, discipline, gratitude, and hope during difficult times, because life humbles everybody. Eventually, money cannot stop heartbreak, fame cannot stop death, success cannot prevent suffering. And during painful moments, many people suddenly begin praying, because deep down, human beings know they are not fully in control. And honestly, another thing that amazes me is consciousness, because science studies the brain, but consciousness itself remains deeply mysterious. What exactly creates awareness, emotions, imagination, dreams, love, and self-reflection? Because human beings are not just machines reacting chemically. There is something deeper inside every person, something searching for purpose, something longing for meaning. And honestly, maybe that longing itself is one of the greatest signs of Allah, because why would human beings naturally search for eternity, truth, morality, and spirituality if existence were only temporary randomness? And honestly, I think many people today are exhausted by shallow living, everybody trying to look important online, everybody chasing validation, everybody comparing themselves constantly. And after years of performing happiness, many people feel spiritually lost, because fake attention never creates real peace. And honestly, Islam attracts many people because Islam reconnects people with discipline, gratitude, humility, prayer, and remembrance of Allah. And honestly, prayer itself changes people, because prayer forces people to pause, slow down, reflect, and reconnect spiritually in a chaotic world. And honestly, chaos defines modern society right now. Everybody angry, everybody distracted, everybody emotionally reactive, and social media made it worse, because negativity spreads faster than wisdom, outrage spreads faster than understanding. And honestly, calm, spiritually grounded people stand out because peace became rare. And honestly, maybe that is why so many people are searching for Allah now, because deep down, human beings know there has to be more than temporary pleasures, more than endless distractions, more than material success, because the soul continues searching for something eternal. And honestly, the deeper people reflect on existence itself, the harder it becomes to believe life is meaningless accident, because creation feels too precise, too intelligent, too balanced, too purposeful. And honestly, maybe science does not disprove Allah at all. Maybe the deeper science explores the universe. The more signs of Allah people begin noticing, because Every discovery reveals more complexity, more order, more mystery, and more evidence that existence itself points towards something infinitely greater than human beings. And honestly, wisdom begins when people stop worshiping their own intelligence and start recognizing the possibility that behind all creation, behind all laws, behind all life stands a creator greater than human understanding, and that creator is Allah. And honestly, another thing people fail to realize is that the more human beings discover about the universe, the more mysterious existence actually becomes, because years ago people thought science would eventually answer every question, but instead every discovery opened even bigger questions, because now scientists understand the universe operates with mathematical precision, everything balanced, everything measured, everything connected. And honestly, mathematics itself is fascinating because math is invisible, yet it governs reality. Planets move according to mathematical L. W's gravity follows mathematical laws. The universe itself functions through order and precision. And honestly, where does that order come from? Because random chaos does not naturally produce perfect structure. And honestly, when people truly reflect deeply, they start realizing existence itself feels intentional, because the universe looks less like an accident and more like a designed system. And honestly, another thing that deeply impacts me is human emotion, because science can study chemicals in the brain, but chemicals alone cannot fully explain love, sacrifice, compassion, hope, or spiritual longing, because there are mothers sacrificing everything for children. There are people risking their lives for strangers. There are individuals remaining patient during suffering despite unimaginable pain. And honestly, where does that spiritual strength come from? Because human beings are more than biology. There's something deeper inside people, something connected to purpose, meaning, and soul. And honestly, one thing modern society desperately lacks right now is spiritual connection, because people became materially connected but spiritually disconnected. Everybody online, yet emotionally lonely. Everybody entertained, yet internally restless. And honestly, social media intensified emptiness, because now people constantly compare themselves, comparing money, appearance, relationships, success. And after years of comparison, many people feel like they are never enough. And honestly, that mindset destroys peace, because peace never comes from constant comparison. Peace comes from gratitude, purpose, discipline, and connection with Allah. And honestly, Islam constantly reminds people about gratitude, because grateful people see blessings differently. Grateful people appreciate life differently, while modern culture trains people to focus only on what they lack: more money, more followers, more attention, more success. And honestly, endless desire creates endless dissatisfaction, because there will always be somebody rich or some. Everybody more famous, somebody more powerful, but spiritually grounded people realize temporary things can never fully satisfy the soul. And honestly, another thing that amazes me is how many signs exist within nature itself, because every season, every sunrise, every heartbeat, every drop of rain reflects order and intelligence. And honestly, many people became so distracted by technology, they stopped noticing creation itself, because human beings now spend more time staring at screens than reflecting on life. And honestly, silence became rare, reflection became rare, deep thinking became rare, because people are constantly consuming noise and distraction. And honestly, distraction is dangerous, because distracted people stop questioning deeper realities. They stop asking why they exist, where they came from, what purpose means, and what happens after death. And honestly, death itself is one of the greatest reminders of Allah, because no matter how rich, powerful, or famous somebody becomes, every human being eventually leaves this world. And honestly, that reality should humble people, because people spend decades obsessing over temporary status while ignoring eternal questions. And honestly, many people avoid thinking about death because it forces uncomfortable reflection. It forces people to confront meaning, accountability, and purpose. And honestly, Islam constantly reminds people that life is temporary, and that reminder changes perspective, because when people remember life is temporary, pride becomes smaller, greed becomes smaller, petty arguments become meaningless, and honestly, spiritually aware people usually become calmer, kinder, and more grateful because they understand this world is not permanent. And honestly, another thing that deeply impacts many people is realizing how perfectly Islam balances spirituality and logic, because Islam does not tell people to stop thinking. It encourages reflection, encourages learning, encourages observing the signs of creation. And honestly, the Quran repeatedly asks to reflect on the heavens, the earth, human creation, and nature itself, because signs exist everywhere for people willing to think deeply. And honestly, many converts say one reason they were drawn toward Islam is because Islam gave them clarity in a confusing world, because modern society often feels morally unstable values, constantly changing truth, constantly shifting, everybody confused about identity, purpose, and direction, while Islam provides clear foundations, discipline, prayer, gratitude, humility, charity, accountability, and connection with Allah, and honestly, structure creates peace because chaos creates anxiety. And honestly, many Americans are emotionally exhausted by chaos, everybody reacting emotionally, everybody angry, everybody divided, and social media profits from outrage because negativity spreads faster than wisdom. But spiritually calm people stand out because calmness comes from inner stability, and inner stability often comes through faith, because faith reminds people they are not alone, reminds people suffering has meaning, reminds people life has purpose beyond temporary struggle. And honestly, another thing that deeply fascinates me is the human fitra, the natural inclination toward belief, because throughout history, across cultures, human beings consistently search for God, spirituality, and higher meaning. And honestly, that universal spiritual instinct itself raises powerful questions, because why do human beings naturally seek purpose? Why do people instinctively search for meaning during suffering? Why do people cry out to God during fear, even when they claim disbelief? Because deep down the soul recognizes its creator, even when the mind becomes distracted. And honestly, modern society distracts people constantly: entertainment, politics, trends, arguments, validation, noise. And after years of distraction, many people become spiritually numb. But eventually hardship wakes people up. Eventually loneliness, heartbreak, fear, or suffering pushes people back toward deeper reflection. Because pain often removes illusions, and honestly, some of the most spiritually transformed people are individuals who went through suffering, because suffering humbles ego and forces people to confront what truly matters. And honestly, another thing science cannot fully explain is why beauty affects human beings so deeply, because sunsets, music, nature, art, and love emotionally move people in ways beyond pure survival. And honestly, maybe that emotional depth itself reflects something greater than material existence, because human beings were created not only to survive physically, but to connect spiritually. And honestly, maybe that is why no amount of money, fame, or pleasure fully satisfies people, because the soul was created for something eternal. And honestly, when people disconnect from Allah, they often spend years trying to replace spiritual emptiness with temporary distractions, relationships, entertainment, addiction, status, and validation. But temporary things cannot permanently fill eternal longing. And honestly, maybe that is why so many people today, despite living in the most technologically advanced generation, still feel lost, anxious, and spiritually empty, because progress without purpose still leaves the soul hungry. And honestly, maybe the deeper truth is this: science can describe creation, but it cannot replace the creator, because behind every law, behind every atom, behind every galaxy, behind every heartbeat stands a reality greater than human understanding. And honestly, wisdom begins when human beings stop acting like they know everything and start recognizing how small they truly are compared to the vastness of existence. Because humility opens doors, arrogance closes them. And maybe that is why the more people sincerely reflect on life, nature, morality, consciousness, suffering, love, and the universe itself, the more signs of Allah begin appearing everywhere around them.